Hi there, I'm Evan Lawson. I am the Artistic Director of Forest Collective, and joining me today is Rosanne Hunt, our amazing cellist. Hi, Rosie.
Hello, Evan. Hi.
Thanks so much for joining. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Now, thanks for preparing this piece. It is quite a ride of a work, quite beautiful. Tell us about a little bit about the piece and how did you come about choosing this work to record?
Well, we can thank V-Line for me playing this piece because the composer Elliott Gyger and I were both doing a concert in Ballarat months ago, and I didn't actually know him. He was singing in the choir of Newman College, and then we found ourselves sitting next to each other on the train on the way home. And we got talking, and he said, "I'm a composer," and I said,
Yeah.
"Oh, great. Have you written any cello pieces?" And he said, "Well, yes." And I said, "Well, can you send it to me? Because there'll be some chances this year with Forest Collective to play some solo cello pieces." So he sent it to me, and then it became my big lockdown project.
And here we are, as they say. And for our international viewers, if we have any, V-Line is our regional train service. So I love this Elliott, who's quite a well-known composer in Melbourne and Australia and internationally, and you're quite well known as a new music cellist, and you'd never cross paths. That's really nice.
We hadn't crossed paths. Yeah, a really, really great story about the benefits of using public transport.
Yes, absolutely. And aside from mounting this piece, which sounds like it's it's quite a challenging work, what else has been taking up your time in lockdown?
Well, of course, concerts cancelled left, right, and centre, but luckily I was able to continue all my teaching on Zoom platform, and so I felt extremely lucky that I was able to do that. My income was secure.
Yeah.
Year 8, so 14-year-old daughter doing remote schooling, ideal age to do remote schooling.
Yeah.
Not too young and not in the critical higher years, which would have been stressful. So that was pretty good. My husband, violin teacher, he'd be in one room with his laptop doing the Zoom teaching. I'd be in this room with my phone doing the Zoom teaching. Very lucky.
Scales just echoing through the house.
Well, yeah. Well, although he was always on headphones, so yeah. Anyway, we've got a long, thin house, so it all worked. And then daughter in the middle room, doing her schooling. And we've got a garden. I like being domestic. So in many ways, I enjoyed lockdown. I felt very, very lucky.
Yeah. Sort of one of those things I've been saying with friends, like people who've won lockdown, you know what I mean? You come out of it with this whole new piece that you've learned and this whole kind of new experience and new way of teaching, which is almost, it's a blessing amongst a curse, really.
Well, yeah, you try to find the silver linings among so much trouble in the world and so on. But this piece, Shifting, as you know, Evan, I was going to play in a concert in July, and if I'd had to play it in July, I don't know how I would have done it. I would not have had the time to learn it properly because it is a very demanding piece. And the hours and hours I spent on it, I was able to because of lockdown and not having to feel stressed about it. Like, I can just wait another week before I record it, or another week, or another week. In the end, it took much longer than I had planned.
That's so good. Well, I'm glad you were able to climb a large mountain for Forest with this one and have the time to be able to do it. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the musical world that you explore when you're playing the piece?
Okay, well, the piece is in 2 distinct sections. The first section is marked with frenetic instability. And the piece itself, called Shifting, well, why is it called Shifting? Well, on the front page of the piece, the frontispiece, under Shifting, Elliott writes, shifting, hand position on the fingerboard, bow position on the string.
Right.
gears, colours, shapes, moods, weight, planes, perspectives, perceptions. So it's very broad, the idea of shifting. And this piece has all of that in it. So there are tremendous technical demands. The first section, frenetic instability, it goes from fortissimo to pianissimo, great articulations, pizzicatos, do normal bowing, drag the drag the wood on the string, play near the bridge. It's like, oh my God, how can I organize all this? And it's very fast. Yep. And in fact, I negotiated with Elliott to do it slower than marked, because I really wanted to play every note that he wrote accurately. And I said to him, Elliott, I can't do that at your marked tempo. So it was great. It's absolutely ideal when you can communicate with the composer, have an exchange, and come to an agreement about what's the best way to meet his vision of the piece, and for me to be able to meet the technical demands in a way that realizes what's on the page.
Of course.
So first section, frenetic instability. I mean, I just had to work so hard on organizing left hand, good fingerings, working how to use the bow, so on. And also it's very demanding rhythmically. There are a lot of tempo changes, 3/8, 1/4, 3/4, and then he's very clear about the pulse has to stay the same. So I had to work a lot on the mathematics of the piece. Then the second half, by complete contrast, remote and fragile.
Right.
And every single note in the second half of the piece is a harmonic, which means that you just put your finger lightly on the string and you use the natural physics of the string to bring out these silvery, transparent notes, which that's the characteristic sound of harmonics. But usually in cello repertoire, the harmonics are all kind of down here, easy. Now, nearly all the harmonics that are written in the second half of the piece you'll see on the video are beyond the fingerboard, between the fingerboard and the bridge. Now,
the stratosphere.
If this was ever professional development, I'd be in harmonics. I mean, the second half is a school in natural harmonics. Thank you, Elliott, for finally, at my ripe old age, forcing me to learn all these. How do you do all these very, micro-millimeter finger adjustment harmonics between the fingerboard and the bridge?
Yep. So
that was also very challenging. But in all these, in every piece I've ever played, in contemporary pieces, there might be huge technical difficulty, but what comes out, in the end, you put in the work, you sort it out, you analyze it, you work out how to execute it, and then you realize, okay, and then there's beauty.
Yeah. Through the technique gives you the vision of the work.
Well, finally, it reveals itself. It's like chipping away at the stone.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. Oh, there it is. And it's like every piece. There's storytelling. There's emotional content, and then it all comes together at the end. And there you go.
You make it work. Well, Rosie, thank you so much for your beautiful words and your beautiful playing. We're now going to speak with the composer himself, Elliott. So that will be next up, followed by the performance of the work Shifting. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you so much for your vision to ask us to do these lockdown recordings, because it's just been fantastic. So thank you so much, and to Forest Collective.
Pleasure. Hi there, Elliott.
Hello, Evan.
Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
So part of our series of the Forest at Home, we are so excited to be presenting your piece Shifting. So thank you so much for being a part of this video. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how the work came about. It's about over 10 years old now, is that right?
It is. It's 13 years old, 2007. It was the last piece that I wrote in the US, I'd been in the US for about a dozen years and then came back to Australia the very beginning of 2008. So this was the last piece I finished while in the US. It was written for an event at Harvard University, which was where I was based at that time.
Yeah.
And it was a concert of all music by Australian composers who had an association with Harvard.
Right.
Because I'd been there as a student and was then teaching there, but there was also Nicholas Vines, who was there as a student. Yep. Andrew Robbie, who was there as a musicology or actually music theory student. James Stanley, who'd been a visiting fellow, and Barry Cunningham, who had been the Australian, he'd occupied the chair of Australian Studies at Harvard for a year, I think around about 2000. Right. So there was a nice group of, about 6 of us that had Harvard connections. And so the concert was all solo cello music presented by a cellist, Jason Calloway, American cellist.
And did you find that there's, like, how did that go in terms of an all Aussie program going down in the sort of heartland of American academic music making?
I think it went down pretty well. US musical academia is very variable depending on exactly where you are as to how aware they are that the rest of the world even exists, to be honest. Right. There are places where the notion of performing even European music would be a bit of a rarity, and the notion that people might actually write music in places like Australia is just sort of beyond imagining. But Harvard's pretty open-minded. Was then still is quite international in its outlook, so it wasn't so strange. And it was interesting. I reckon that there probably wasn't, in terms of the stylistic range of the pieces, it sort of fitted in pretty well in terms of what people would come to expect from a new music concert in the States.
I always think of Milton Babbitt whenever I've kind of had any association with sort of the American university circuit, if you will, and that kind of attitude that, of course, is not ever present across the country, but just that kind of, that's my immediate thought, you know what I mean, of this kind of like staunch, stark, very kind of, a certain way of doing things.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes the US really different from Australia in that respect is that because it's so huge, each individual school, individual department is actually very, very focused in its aesthetic outlook. So, if you're a composer, you need to do your research coming from abroad because, you might think Harvard and Princeton, they're both really cool places, but, you would be, composers that would be comfortable in one place absolutely would not be comfortable in the other and vice versa because of the difference of aesthetic outlook. Whereas in Australia, where, there's too few programs here for us to be that exclusionist in terms of style. So we tend to be much more open-minded as a general principle, which I think is really healthy anyway.
Oh, absolutely. And Rosie's just spoken a little bit about what she's doing in shifting and this sort of idea of the kind of the actual shifting she's doing throughout the piece. Could you tell us a little bit about your musical vision for the work?
Yeah. It's hard to remember because it's a while ago, but my recollection is that it was one of those pieces where I settled on a title relatively early on, and the title actually then helped to sort of like put the ideas about the piece in perspective. So shifting, of course, is a technical term for string players in the sense of particularly, moving the left-hand position on the fingerboard is referred to as shifting. And then I thought, well, how about I write a piece which is all about gear changes? All about sort of being in one place and then suddenly moving to another place, and that plays out on the global level of the piece in a very clear way, which falls into 2 completely different halves. And in one of those halves, there's an enormous amount of internal shifting, a lot of high rate of change, lot going on, so that within the first half of the piece, there's lots and lots of variety. The shift into the second half of the piece then moves you into another world where actually there's very little change. and we're talking about shift more on the global level, that we've come from this space of frenetic activity to something that's much more suspended and static.
And that second section, the harmonic section's so beautiful. And Rosie was saying that it's almost like an essay or a study in pure harmonics, which personally is something, a bugbear of mine. Whenever I do any harmonics with string players, even if I just include two, inevitably there is so many discussions around how to approach it, what the concept of those harmonics were. How you must have done a ton of work on that. Part of the piece.
Yeah, I just looked up my sketches for it and was interested to discover that although I normally write pieces from beginning to end, it's pretty clear from the materials I found that I wrote the harmonic section first, which I didn't remember actually.
Yeah, right.
And then then again, looking at the sketches, it looks like everything else, so all of the complexity of the ideas in the first half of the piece was sort of worked out afterwards as an extrapolation from the way I approached the harmonics. So I've always been fascinated by, particularly getting up onto those high upper partials on double bass and cello. This piece really pushes the limits in terms of what's possible. Rosie makes it work absolutely beautifully. So I'm very gratified to know that it's possible.
Yes.
But obviously there's a lot of investment of time there. And one of the beautiful things about it, of course, is that the notes are not equal tempered up there. So by the time you've got some really interesting sort of relationships between pitches that are less than a semitone apart, because for example, you might have a C on the C string, which is an octave overtone of the fundamental and therefore an equal tempered C. But then you've got the C, which is the seventh overtone on the D string, which is going to be noticeably flatter.
Yes.
So there's all of those kinds of interesting sort of like games that you can play with those microtonal intervals between the harmonics on different strings.
And just the variety of character. There's just this whole world to compose with it.
There is, but it's like you've sort of zoomed into the focus, so that whereas in the first half of the piece, there's all of this variety that's occupying this sort of massive range. Everything sort of like shrinks in, and all of that variety is still there, but it's on a much compressed scale.
Yes. And Rosie mentioned that you hadn't worked together until this piece before, and that you happened to meet on a train one day, and
that's right.
Here we are.
We were both involved in performing at the Ballarat Organs of the Goldfields Festival in January this year. And yeah, we happened to be on the same train coming back to Melbourne and got talking. I'd known Rosie's name from her work with Elysian, both live and in recordings. I was at Elysian's very first concert they gave in Sydney in I think 1987 or thereabouts, when I was like 15.
Wow.
And I didn't know what had hit me. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, but I was absolutely fascinated. I don't know if Rosie might well have been performing in that concert, but if not, she was certainly performing with the group around about that time. So yeah, it was really fascinating to, first of all, that I'd thought of her as purely a new music player, and the first time I encounter her is actually she's playing Baroque cello and period instrument performance of Bach. But really fascinating and she's a lovely, warm person, and we had a great conversation on the train. And yes, this performance has come out of that.
Here we are. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and it's just so nice to have this little collaboration come about, with Forest Collective and with Forest at Home at this time. So we'll now move on to the performance of the piece. Thank you for joining me today, Elliott.
Thank you so much, Evan, and a big thank you to Rosie too.
Absolutely. Thanks.